There's one more arena in which middle-class women and working-class women's interests in some sense both overlapped and yet divided from each other, and that's the area of domestic service. So here we have these women moving now into industrial jobs of one kind or another and moving out of service in the home. They move into industrial jobs for what reason, when domestic service, after all, still pays probably as well, if you consider the room and board, as non-industrial jobs.
Yeah, and that is one of the most striking developments, I think, of the post-Civil War period, is that you see so many native-born white women, especially, leaving jobs as domestic servants to go work in factories or department stores, and this completely mystifies upper-class women and middle-class women. They sort of think, why would these women, why would our servants want to go out and work in a factory? It's dirty and dangerous, when they could be here, you know, working in our homes. And working class women had very clear answers to that question. A lot of them really felt that working as a domestic servant compromised their independence. They complained about the fact that there was somebody ordering them around all the time. They felt like if they were in, say, a workshop, you know, maybe where 20 women were working together, they had a sort of collective protection in the fact that they were working with other women. That made them feel more comfortable. A lot of women who were domestic servants were actually sexually harassed. I mean, Lenora Berry talked about the problem of sexual harassment in industrial work, but it was endemic in domestic work. And a lot of women who left domestic service said they left their jobs because of harassment. Then there was also the issue of leisure time. Women who worked in factories or department stores, even if the hours were long and the wages were low, the day had a definite start and stop. And so they knew more or less when they would go to work, when they would get off from work. And once they were off from work, especially if they were young and unmarried and didn't yet have family responsibilities, their time was their own. And they really valued this new leisure time that they had.
So what you're saying is that wages were not the only measure of independence, and perhaps not the most important measure for many women.
Right, wages were not the only measure. The other thing that I've noticed about it is that employers tended to rate the value of the room and board they provided much more highly than the working women did. So in other words, they saved working women from having to pay board, but often the working women would be living in really lousy conditions. They would have almost no furniture, or they would be in the basement or in the attic. They wouldn't have any privacy. So for the working women, it might be worth it, if they could afford it, to live in a boarding house or room with a couple of other women and spend the money on that, rather than deal with the poor conditions of boarding in somebody else's household.
One reads stories of women domestic servants sleeping in the kitchen on cardboard or crates, wooden crates that are stacked together, and that was their sleeping place for as long as they worked in those places.
Yeah, so actually the conditions, in a way, even if you were in an affluent home, you might be living in pretty poor conditions if you were a servant.
Boarding houses, though, boarding houses are a two-edged sword in a way. They're comfortable environments for women to live in if one has enough money to actually pay for them. So Clara Driscoll, for example, lives most of her working life in a boarding house where she's quite comfortable and she doesn't have to deal with doing the laundry or cooking or shopping or any of those things. So for her, boarding house living is real freedom.
Yeah, I think boarding houses sort of solve the problem of domestic labor, which is an issue that women always had to deal with. Even if women were going out and working for wages, often in their families, they were still responsible for the the cooking and the cleaning, for caring for other people. So I think in some senses, for young working women to move into these boarding houses actually freed them from a lot of the unpaid labor that women had to do otherwise.
Yet another form of independence that women could claim to have.